Thank you. Yeah, so Juliana set the bar high. I hope this is as good as she makes you think it will be. But this is some work that I've done with the fabulous Adrienne Ward, who's here, Ayelet Ganizi, and Martin Boss on the cognitive consequences of smartphones. So I don't think I need to convince this crowd that smartphones are an incredibly popular and important tool that people are using 80 times a day or more. And there's been a lot of great research on sort of the consequences of interacting with smartphones, both the positive and negative. But thankfully, there are still a lot of situations in which people are engaging in other activities and they're not actually working with or looking at or using their phones in any way. But what we were interested in was whether the mere presence of your smartphone might still have some sort of impact even in these situations where you're not using it. And we're particularly interested in cognitive consequences. So we drew from this cognitive psychology research that shows that, of course, cognitive resources are limited. So we have a limited supply of resources we can use to pay attention to stimuli, to learn, to reason. But also beyond attending to something requiring resources, we know that keeping stimuli from interfering with conscious attention also occupies these resources. So not only does paying attention to something require these resources, but also stopping that process does as well. And we finally know that things in our environment that are frequently relevant garner what's known as automatic attention. So if we're engaged in conversation and you hear your name somewhere else, you'll automatically orient toward the sound of your name. And so what we were interested in was whether, because smartphones have become such a valuable, important tool for people, people have potentially learned this automatic orientation toward their smartphone. So is there automatic attention to your phone? And beyond this, if there is such a gravitational pull to orient toward your smartphone, the act of not paying attention to your smartphone might similarly occupy cognitive resources. So we set out to test whether merely having your smartphone in your environment might occupy some of your cognitive resources, even when you're not looking at it or engaging with it. So to test this, we had 2 experiments in which participants came to the lab and they completed this task on a computer assessing their working memory capacity, so their available cognitive resources. And they did so under one of 3 conditions. So in all cases, their phones were silenced and the vibrate was off. So there weren't any actual interruptions by the phone during the experiment. But importantly, we varied where they had their phones while they were completing this task. And so for some participants, their phone was in another room altogether. It's far away. For some participants, they kept their phone however they naturally carry it, so in their pockets or in their bags. And then finally, in the last condition, we had them put their phones out on the desk. And so remember, these phones are silenced, the vibrate's off, and beyond that, for some of our participants, the phones were turned off completely, right? So there's no potential for any interaction. And for the others, they had the phones placed face down. So people aren't actually looking at their phones to seek notifications. Oh, I don't want to spoil my results. So before I tell you what our fabulous results are, we also measured some other tasks. So we had them complete a measure of sustained attention. So essentially, it was a similar task on a computer where they had to react quickly to different stimuli and resist reacting. And so we don't find any influence of the phone's location on this task, which suggests that people are successfully able to maintain their attention on the computer. So they're paying attention to the task consciously. And we also asked them things like, were you thinking about your phone at all during this task, or were you looking at your phone? We don't find any differences across condition there either. But despite this, we do find effects on their available working memory capacity. So what these graphs are, this is their performance on that working memory task. And in both of our experiments, we find this linear decrease in working memory capacity as a function of the salience of the phone. So they did best when their phones were in another room and worse when their phones were out on the desk. But this wasn't the case for everybody. So we had a measure of smartphone dependence, which is essentially things like, I feel like I couldn't get through a day without my smartphone. And so we find that for the people who have high dependence on their devices, we do see this gap here. So putting their phones in a separate room made them perform better on the task. But for people who are low in dependence, they don't feel like they rely on their phones too much, we don't find any influence of the phone's location. And so with this in mind, I'd like you to think about all the situations in your life in which your smartphone might be merely present and perhaps you don't think that you're thinking about your phone or seeking to check it, but we suggest that just the presence of the device there might occupy some of your working memory resources and reduce your available cognitive capacity. Thank you. I think I can take one question if there is one. Yeah.
So do you think the lab study situation might have, the running the study in a lab might have contributed to this effect because people were thinking, okay, well, I have my phone, but I probably shouldn't be using it, right? So creating this working memory impediment.
So you're suggesting that because we told them to put their phones there, they were perhaps more focused on the phone's presence than usual?
Right,
Is that
because,
the case?
okay, yeah, I kind of want to use my phone, but, you know, I'm in a lab study, so I can't. So, you know, that might occupy more working memory than it normally would.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's potentially the case, but I'm not sure that that would produce differences as a function of whether the phone's out on the desk versus in your pocket. So even if you have it on your person, you might expect that to be similar. But also, in real life, I think there are lots of situations where you don't want to look at your phone, right? If you're talking to somebody important, you don't want to have your phone there, you don't want to be looking at it. And so these temptations to look at your phone, they might be salient even in the real world. Thank you.